Good morning and welcome to our panel discussion on careers in business and consulting. We're glad that you joined us despite the ACC tournament this morning. My name is Alyssa Bostrom. I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School here at Duke. And I'm pleased to welcome you to today's discussion on behalf of my partners in the Office of Postdoctoral Services and the Duke Career Center. And we're very pleased to have on camera Mark Matheson from the Office of Postdoctoral Services. So we have this for posterity. Today's event is part of the year-long Careers Beyond Academia series, co-sponsored by the grad school, the Office of Postdoctoral Services, and others. And I want to also point out that we have a representative from the Duke Career Center with us today. Dr. Dave McDonald is here from the Duke Career Center. So graduate students, if you haven't met Dave yet, he's a great contact and resource for you. All right, so let me turn to our esteemed and distinguished panelists this morning. So starting from my immediate left, let me introduce our panelists. Dr. Geoff Banks, who is President and CEO of Nuventra Pharma Sciences. Then to his left, Dr. Sarah Paisner, who is Director of Marketing at Portfolio Decisions, Inc. Then Mary Beth Thomas, who is Vice President of the Centers of Innovation Program at the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. And finally, on the far left, Dr. Melanie Troll, who is partner and co-founder of Bioscience Information Partners. We're very pleased to welcome them here today. To start the discussion, I'll ask the panelists to give a brief description of their background and career trajectory to date. And then we'll move on to questions. And a number of you submitted questions when you registered online, and we'll be sure to incorporate some of those into the conversation. So to get started, I'm going to ask Dr. Banks to begin.
So my background is I have a PhD in biochemistry. I did a postdoc at NIEHS. Didn't really like working in the lab that much. I'm sure you probably have a similar sort of experience. At least some people I've talked to have tried to come out of academia into industry. And wanted to move into the pharmaceutical industry. And so I happened to get a job at a CRO, started to get some experience doing drug development. Sort of kind of grew from there. Early on in my career, I met a senior level consultant who was doing pharmacokinetics. And from there, I started to learn a little bit more about what that meant and what pharma companies were doing with that aspect of drug development. Gained more experience in it, and then in 2008, I had an opportunity that I just couldn't pass up, which was to start a consulting firm working with the person I met early in my career. And we formed a partnership that eventually grew into Nuventra. I started out as an individual consultant. I left a job. I quit a job at a pharma company to start consulting because the opportunity was presented to me that I just couldn't pass up. And from the one-person consulting organization, just organically grew the business to, we're now 32 people, again focusing on an aspect of drug development which is called pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, understanding how the drug interacts with the body, how the body interacts with the drug. Every drug needs it, all pharma companies need it, they don't have a lot of experience in it in-house, small companies don't, the large companies have to outsource it, and so there's an opportunity that I felt in 2008 that I could move into this area of research, and we just sort of grown from there.
So my career is perhaps a bit more varied. I have a PhD from UC Berkeley, undergrad from Dartmouth. I got out of my PhD and actually came here to UNC for a postdoc, and went and started a traditional industrial career. I went to GE, I did R&D for the electronics industry. From there I moved to Lord Corporation, which is down in Cary, moving from straight industrial R&D into applied R&D, and then into product development, and started working with customers, and came to this realization that I actually liked talking to customers. I liked the lab bench, mixing stuff and creating new products a lot less than the talking to the customers, figuring out how to sell a product, figuring out how to make it into a product. And so I thought, all right, well, I have skills, I can go to the business side. That didn't quite work out as well as one might think. Ironically, there are PhDs in the world who are not very good at talking to people. You might know of you, perhaps, but that is the stereotype, the crazy hair with the white lab coat. And so, unfortunately, it's harder to transition than you might think necessarily, unless you have a perfect opportunity. And so my perfect opportunity was that I applied to business school. And so I applied to the UNC evening program and the full-time program. I live 2 miles away, which is why I applied there. And I got into both, and then deciding whether to work and get an MBA or do an MBA full-time, they gave me a full ride. And I'll tell you, if you have a PhD, if you have a little bit of experience in industry, it's not that uncommon. And business schools really like scientists because there aren't enough scientists in the business world. So if you decide to get an MBA, whether it's a full-time program or the evening program or an executive program, a lot of business schools give merit scholarships, and while certainly I'm not guaranteeing anything, it's probably likely you'll get something. So think about that if you ever decide to apply. So I got a full fellowship with stipend, and so I went to the full-time program. So I got an MBA, and I came, while I was in my MBA program, I started a company and got into the entrepreneurship side. I started an LED lighting company called Blue Lit Bridge Lighting Solutions. You've never heard of it because it died. 9 out of 10 startups fail. In case you were curious, I was one of the 9 for that company. But it was a fantastic experience. One of the things you learn when you do a startup is it turns out there is life after your job. The company failed, right? I found a job within 2 months. And I found an even better job than I could have imagined from just the MBA. And so Portfolio Decisions is a small consulting and software firm based out of Houston. There were 5 people when I joined. I was the 6th hire. They're now around 15. I focused on developing essentially creating marketing for them. It'd always been consulting. They started off as a very small consulting firm, and all of their clients were the people they knew, and they wanted to grow. And so in order to grow, you need people to know who you are and understand what you do and get your brand. And that's something that I did for the company. I've since left Portfolio Decisions. This is a relatively recent development. There is some technology that some scientists at UNC would like to take to market. And so they asked me to see if I could do it for them. And so I am currently at the very beginning stages. We don't even have a company name. We're so early in the process to decide if it's worth pursuing. And so it's very exciting. It's very scary because I left a job, full-time, well-paying job, and I don't have income right now. Now luckily, and I recommend this to all of you, men and women, I have a very supportive partner who does bring in income, so we're okay. Mortgage will get paid. But this is the startup community. Things change fast. So I've had a fantastic time going into this a little bit challenging, scary world. I highly recommend it if you're interested.
Dr. Thomas. Okay. I'm Mary Beth Thomas, and I apologize if my voice gives out because it's kind of touch and go this week. So my background is I have an undergraduate from the Rochester Institute of Technology. I went to graduate school at the University of Cincinnati, and I studied developmental biology there. After there, I came to Duke, and I did my postdoc in the neurobiology department in Calais Street, where I applied developmental biology to the early forebrain development and gene expression. I think my trigger for leaving academic science was sadly watching my postdoctoral mentor not get tenure from Duke. It was a grueling process, and he didn't get it and had to leave. And I decided after watching that, I was already a little bit on the fence about whether to stay in academics, but after watching that, I really didn't want to let anybody control my career the way that happened. And so at the exact, right around the same time that he did not get tenure, and he was looking for other places to go, I had already told him that my spouse and I had just moved here. We hadn't been here that long. He was very happily ensconced in a position over at the VA. So I said, wherever you go, I'm not going because I want to stay in the area, because he was likely going to leave the state. So I started thinking about what was going to be next. I could have jumped to another postdoc, but I really didn't want to do that. I already kind of knew that wasn't going to be my trajectory. So coincidentally, at around the same time, there were 2 faculty members in my department that were thinking of starting a company. And I had kind of heard through the grapevine in the department that they were thinking of doing this. And so I just laid myself on their doorstep, and I said, "What are you doing? What do you think you're gonna do? When are you gonna do it?" We talked. I didn't work for either of them. They didn't really know me very well. They knew what I did in the department, but in general, they were just not very familiar with me. But we sat down, we talked. A lot of my skills were very transferable for what they were spinning out. And so even though they did not have money, when my postdoctoral mentor closed his lab and left, I basically went unemployed, and thankfully also had a supportive spouse. I will highly encourage that as well. I went unemployed for about 2 to 3 months while they found a CEO and they pursued money. And they were very good. They knew they wanted to hire me. They kept me in the loop the whole time. It was a good experience. I helped them put together parts of their business plan because they were obviously seeking money to start the company at the time. So that was a very good experience. They did successfully get money, and we started that company. I worked for that company for 4 years, and then it closed, which it was also one of the failures, which is very, very, very common, especially in the biotech space. I left when that company closed, went on unemployment, which I wouldn't suggest for anybody, but it is an interesting experience. You're the most highly educated person in the unemployment office when you have to go each week, but it is a life experience, I will tell you that much. Very soon after that, though, I did move to another biotech company. It was called Transzyme. Transzyme was interested in the work that I had done at my last company, and picked me up pretty quickly. I was at Transzyme for several years, but in both the first company, which was called Cogent Neuroscience, I probably neglected to say that, but at both Cogent and at Transzyme, I was still a scientist. I was an industrial scientist. I was doing assay development. I was scaling up assay development, assays to handle volume and produce therapeutic candidates that would be moved forward. So I was still a scientist. I was still a bench scientist. I managed a lot of people at that point, but I was still a scientist. And as Transzyme went through a merger with another company. And when they did that, they were going to change their trajectory, which was really going to push them in a very different direction from the reason I joined them. And so I sat down with the CEO, who was a very nice guy, and I said, I don't think this is the place for me anymore. I said, you're going to go this way, and I don't really want to go that way. And so he wished me well, gave me a great recommendation. I started kind of searching for different things, but I kind of used this time to decide that I really wanted to move away from bench scientist. I was going to continue to get those positions. I probably would have continued to get them. But if I wanted to change my career trajectory, I needed to find something else. And so I actually secured a position for an organization called the Small Business Technology Development Center, which is actually an outreach service of the UNC system. It focuses on small business in North Carolina. I was their technology person. I was their life science person, let's put it that way. And since there's a lot of life science in North Carolina, it kind of pushed me right in there. And I think the important thing about that transition is, compared to Sarah, where she chose to go back to business school to get her business credibility, what I took to the SBTDC, which is its acronym, was a knowledge of day-to-day life in a tech startup, but that was all through just day-to-day reality of seeking money, pitching to investors. That's just what I had to do in the job, and that's kind of what I took to the counseling service. I just couldn't get myself to go back for my MBA. I don't know. It was just one of those things that I really, really thought about it. It was the time that I would have done it, and I just chose to go to this other position. Now, I will tell you, though, that when I made that transition, I went into more of an entry-level position in the business counseling world. I did take a hit in my compensation because it was a nonprofit, and I was coming into it with a skill set, but not exactly their tailored skill set. So I took a downgrade in position to make that transition, but I will tell you that it eventually was well worth it. I got great exposure in that position. I did very well. I was promoted to lead the group that I ended up being in at that point in time, which was statewide exposure. I was the statewide commercialization director for their technology group. And that eventually led to my current position because I had made very strong ties with the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. They got new money from the legislature to start a new grant program back in about 2008, and they basically asked me if I would come and lead it because they were very familiar with what I did at the SPTDC. So I think a lot of my job transitions were through people I know, which I'm sure is going to have, if that's going to be a continuing message for you, is network the hell out of the people you know. And a lot of my transitions to get to where I am today were definitely from that.
Well, I have a PhD in plant biology from the University of Georgia, and I did a postdoctoral position at Penn State University. And at some point in there, partly because my advisor also failed to get tenure, and I just realized, you know, the academic thing was not for me. But I was still trying to figure out what to do, and my spouse got a position at Duke, so we relocated here. And the first week we were here, my neighbor came by dropping off flyers for a party and said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not sure. I'm looking for a job." And he said, "Oh, I'm hiring." And I knew nothing about this whole world of consulting and the combination of life sciences skill set with business strategies, which is exactly what they did. But because I happened to meet my neighbor,
be nice to your neighbors.
I started working there in 1999, actually, and did that for a decade. And again, I took more of an entry-level sort of position because I did not have the MBA, and had to learn on the fly some of the sort of things that I would have learned in an MBA program. But there were other people there with MBAs, and it was a good environment because there were plenty of people like me, you know, a staff of maybe 15 people. 10 of us had science backgrounds, but not a business background. So we were able to work with the 5 who had the business background and the science background and sort of figure everything out. But after 10 years of doing that, my boss, the owner of the company, decided he was ready to semi-retire. So another woman and I working there said, well, maybe we can do this. So we founded Bioscience Information Partners in 2010 and did not really know what that meant at the time. But now we've learned that that means you do everything. So, you know, I thought it was interesting. It's asking, like, what's your typical day? There is no typical day. You know, is it a day you need to do the marketing? Is it a day you need to do invoicing? You do everything. But I've really enjoyed that challenge. So for me, there's been a lot of serendipity in how I ended up at this point.
Thank you. So, Dr. Troll, you've alluded a little bit to what kind of a typical day looks like. Could you tell us maybe what a typical, and I know it's not typical, right? What a week looks like in your job, and I'll certainly come back around. Do you do email? Do you do research? Do you meet
baskets?
What does that look like?
Baskets, right. Well, there are always fires to put out. And our company is very small, and everything we do is project driven. So, you know, what you're doing, it might be that a company needs some primary market research, and so that week I'm making telephone calls or having focus groups or setting up an online survey. Or it might be that you're examining a new technology for a VC firm's trying to decide if they want to invest in them, and then you're really getting the scientific papers and you're trying to understand this technology and figure out you can't be an expert in everything, but you need to know enough who are the experts. So you're trying to get familiar with that, and then you're contacting the experts and you're saying, well, can you look at this? You know, they have to sign a CDA, they have to look at something. So you're doing all the paperwork that goes under that. And then with my hat of being the company co-owner, there's all this sort of background stuff of the marketing and writing the proposals and sending out the invoices and paying the bills in general. The accounting hat that I never expected to have to wear is one that, you know, we could hire an accountant, and we do have an accountant who does some things, but the day-to-day stuff, I take care of that. And then, of course, the networking. That's very important. So going to meetings, always trying to find more clients, more customers. And then, of course, there's a lot of writing. Most people still want some sort of written deliverable. Sometimes it's a slideshow, sometimes it's the statistical analysis of the results of the survey that you posted several weeks ago that you've been trying to get feedback on. So there are a lot of different buckets that things go in.
So right now at the Biotech Center, I run a grant program. Just to kind of make sure everybody knows what it is, the Biotech Center is it's a nonprofit. It's an independent nonprofit. It's largely funded by the state of North Carolina. Has been for 30 years. Focused exclusively on just trying to foster the biotech industry in the state. We have grant and loan programs that go out towards to universities and community colleges, and loans go out to small businesses to grow them. I work on the grant side, and grant administration was not something I was very familiar with when I came into it, but there's my grant program is kind of bridges, similar to my background, kind of bridges between the academics and the business world. I interface with a lot on both sides of those. I do a lot of meetings, not surprisingly. I don't do any lab work. I have no pipettes. I have nothing on my desk other than maybe a little model with my other art. But I think grant oversight, in addition to a lot of networking and pulling people into the groups that support the grants that I oversee, there's also an oversight component, which I would classify similar to what Melanie just talked, which is that administrative operational piece that automatically comes with project work. Like, project work is great, it's very exciting, it's new ideas, you're putting pieces together, you're matching people up, but then there's all the background work that all has to happen, which is I have to track the dollars, they're state public dollars, I have to know where they go, are they spending them the way they told me they would spend. There's a lot of metric tracking for my organization, so that all falls to me for my program as well. I think, you know, that's just kind of an aspect that comes with every project that lands on your plate. Similarly, the other thing that I think that I do now as well is the Biotech Center received new money last year from the state to foster the development of a biodefense initiative, and this is more around putting life science assets in North Carolina towards military and homeland security challenges. And North Carolina has a huge military presence, whether you recognize that or not, it's enormous. It's a huge part of our economy, and all those people need medical care. All of them have health care problems, many of them put themselves at risk in battle, and so the other program that I run right now is putting those two things together. So that's another piece of networking, connecting people with assets between the company side and the academic side, and that's not, it probably seems really far removed from my postdoctoral work in developmental biology of the human forebrain, which it is, but what I will tell you is science is a great training ground for getting you to understand how to use this. It's the critical thinking that came out of your science training can be applied to anywhere you want to apply it, whether that be business or engineering, or, you know, it's very, very, it is something that you will take no matter what you do after this. It is something that you will take from your graduate and your postdoctoral work, which is how to think. And that, don't take that for granted, because there's a lot of people out there that I can darn well tell you don't know how to think. And so, so always feel like you come out of science with great training and great flexibility that you can apply if you decide you like your area.
So I'm going to start my daily thing. I'm going to ask everyone a question, and I want you to raise your hand if you've ever tried to explain what you do in the lab to someone who does not have a PhD in what you do, and have them look at you and go, what? Raise your hand. How many of you had that happen? Okay. My job, what I do as the director of marketing, is I take what you do in your lab that most people don't understand, and I make it so that people who could use what you do in something else that they could buy for what they need, understand it. That is the job of a someone who translates technology into customer language. That's what I do. So what do I do on a daily basis? Well, I was the director of marketing at Portfolio Decisions, known as past tense, but I'll talk about that for now. I did everything from working at the strategic level, so thinking about like the whole industry. So who are our competitors? What's happening in the market? We were in the oil and gas industry, and so I don't know how many of you have noticed the part where the price of oil has gone down. Well, that's catastrophic for us. It's great for the consumer, terrible for people in the industry. The industry is in chaos right now. companies are underwater, there are oil fields that we're going to make money at $120 a barrel, excuse me, that we're going to still maybe be okay at 70, but at 40, or just SOL. That's okay, right? Yeah. And so what we, right. So that's the part, so that's one aspect. The other aspect was taking our product, and it's a software consulting product. We have consultants, we have software, and they work together, and we're trying to sell the product, the software by itself. And then figuring out where it fits, who it goes to, who should we sell to? Do we sell to the CEO? Do we sell to the analyst? Do we sell to, I don't know, some unnamed, unknown person? And so trying to figure out where a product fits in the whole market. And this is a lot of esoteric stuff, but it is fundamental. Until you know who your customer is, you can't tell them what your product is. Because what you think your product does, and the technical, like your description of what you do in lab, until you know how that might affect the person you're talking to, it doesn't matter what you say, because it may not mean anything to them. And so that's sort of a second level of what I do. And then the bottom level is the fundamental tactics, executing on tactics. So most of what, as a customer, we see are the tactical executions. You see a price at the market. You go to the grocery store, you see the price for cereal. Well, I guarantee there was 2 months of discussion about what to make that price. I do that. We've spent 3 months, I have to keep using the past tense because it's so recent, but we spent 3 months coming up with pricing for our software product. Because we wanted to make sure that it's a high-end product, it's a 6-figure price. We didn't want to leave money on the table, but we wanted people to be willing to try it. So we came up with, all sorts of different schemes for pricing. And that cereal box, that price, 3 months of discussion, of analysis of the market, analysis of competitors, analysis of what else is going on out there, right? Product, how does your product look? So I develop websites. I've learned enough code to be extremely dangerous at this point. I develop websites, I develop marketing collateral. So on a day, I might be designing a brochure. I might be updating the website, literally going in there and changing the code to make it look like I want it to look. Thank goodness for lots of systems that make it easier for non-code people like myself. I sometimes sat in a meeting all day talking about what something should look like. And that seems very superficial, but there's a crazy, enormous amount of science to color. Crazy. Depending on what color you make something, it attracts different people. And you guys are affected by this all the time and you don't even realize it. Orange energizes people. Blue makes you trust them. But we're a very high-end sale, very expensive, and we're talking to CEOs of billion, gazillion dollar companies, oil and gas companies that you probably know. We have been talking to those, we were talking to those companies. So do we want them to get energized or trust us? It seems like such a silly thing, but it's extremely important. To, meeting with, we work with some consultants to help us with some things, like we had a pricing consultant, because none of us in the 15 were deep enough in pricing to be able to come up with kind of how we wanted to think about it. To honestly doing stuff like doing trade shows. I created trade shows. I did invoices, except on my end I was paying the invoices. Hiring designers. I mean, there's a wide array of things I did. Everything from the mundane to just copy editing, to the esoteric, such as pricing, to the, oh my goodness, there's a competitor whose website looks just like ours. What are we going to do? We have the same words. We can't differentiate ourselves. So I did a lot of different things, and here's the cool part that I found. I have a PhD in chemistry, a postdoc, an MBA. Once a scientist, always a scientist. I'm always testing. In the marketing language, they call it A/B testing, but you know what it is. You guys do this all the time. You do 3 experiments, and you change a variable. It's pretty straightforward. When you do this in marketing, you'd be amazed how people respond differently to some instruction. And so I'm a scientist, I'll always be a scientist. And so in my marketing, in my business development, in starting new companies, I'm always testing. And that's something I find fun. I got tired of no doubt about it, I think all 4 of us have experienced that. But my day-to-day is pretty varied, even though it has that sort of overarching marketing description.
So my day has evolved over, I started the company in 2008. It's been 7 years since I started it. My day as an individual consultant is much different than my day right now. As I wasn't really calling myself a CEO at that point. I was really just a consultant. And I had, for me, I didn't have a spouse that was working at the time. Then I had a 3-month-old at home when I left my job. So it really was, I call it the perfect storm, because I literally walked out of a job on a Friday and I'd already had a consulting gig started on Monday. And I think that was absolutely key. I've known people that have tried to move into consulting that didn't quite have either a message or an angle or something to go into initially, and it's been a real tough challenge because, you know, there's a lot of consultants out there. You have to sort of rise above the fray, if you will. The people I were calling on initially, I was a little naive. I'm thinking, well, I'm a consultant, they want to work with me, you know, great, let's start working together, and it was tough. I mean, I had to network with people that I knew. I really relied on the person that I started with, his name was Bill, who gave me some overflow work, and I had my first consulting gig. So early on, my week was really just doing projects. It was trying to do projects, trying to think about how to find new projects and new clients. I don't have a business degree, and so over time, my role has evolved. I was IT manager for the company, I was HR, I was invoicing, I was everything, and I sort of kind of over time have sort of hired people in that have taken things off my plate like that. So my days this week, I'm doing some projects, I'm managing our marketing and sales group, I'm managing a division, scientific division within the company that are working on projects for clients, trying to talk to new clients. We have a number of interactions with new clients weekly that come through asking about our capabilities and questions, so I'll jump on calls with them on that. We recently had a conference we were at, and we had some debrief and discussions about how to engage all the new clients that talked to us at the conference. And so it's a lot of email, it's a lot of writing, it's a lot of talking and meetings. At this point of the game, early on, it was really just sort of kind of head down doing the work and trying to figure out how to maximize your billable time and find more avenues for work to come in and new clients to discuss with. I think that was the biggest challenge early on. Now we have a sales and marketing group that are really starting to generate more work coming in by the name of the company. Early on, it was more of our consultant's reputation, and I would always joke with the guy I started the company with that he did business development by waiting for the phone to ring because he knew so many people in the industry. And I think if there's an opportunity to move into consulting, it really is about networking. It's about maybe trying to find somebody, at least what I've experienced is trying to find somebody who's maybe later in their career who's looking for some support. I have a number of senior consultants that have wanted to work with us because we offer all of the base level of support, you know, the invoicing, the legal, the IT infrastructure that allows them the opportunity to focus on the science. And that's how we've been able to grow the business, basically. We match that right now with really good PhD level people that want to sort of make that jump from academia into industry. We have a lot of sort of entry-level positions that's how I got started in the business, is trying to find that entry-level position, gain some experience, and then figure out a path moving forward. So that's a typical week for me.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Dr. Thomas this time. Shake up the order just a little bit. All right, so we have some great questions from the audience today, and one of them is, what are maybe the top 2 or 3 transferable skills that the postdocs and graduate students in the room can be developing while they're here at Duke?
You didn't give us these beforehand. So I think one of the things that you know, I mentioned it in my last section that I was speaking is the flexibility that you are developing just because you're doing the work that you're doing right now. But I would also say that use this as a time to where you can start to get used to, and I consider this a transferable skill, even though it's not like, you know, internship or something like that. It's pushing yourself to places where you're not comfortable. I think that what you've heard, I think, from each of us is there is a time when you're making these transitions, when you're deciding to jump or start a company, that you're going to feel really uncomfortable, that you're going to feel that you're taking a big risk, and you are. But I think that the more you get used to that feeling, that you will start to recognize that, yes, this is a risk, but it is also a huge opportunity. And if you never approach the risk, if you always say, oh, but this guy's going to offer me the next postdoc job, or I can run this guy's lab, and that's the safe, it's very safe, it's very stable, and I don't want to say that those aren't great directions to go if you want to go. And there are times in your life where you will need to go those directions, where you need stability, you need a paycheck, a stable paycheck. But I would encourage you, when you are at a time where you have some flexibility in your schedule, go to a networking event that you might not have gone to. The Biotech Center has tons of networking events. Go to our calendar, look at the events. We have a jobs network event. We have a business networking event. There's science exchange groups where if you're in botany but you'd like to move into human health, where you can just dip your toe in. And it is scary, and it is risky, but I would really encourage you to develop that and get that feeling and understand that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. And people are remarkably generous with their time when you put yourself out there. If you reach out and say, I'm thinking about transitioning, or hey, I know what your company does and I'm interested in finding out more, reach out to them. The cold call may not result in what you want, but a lot of times it might, and I know mine have. So I consider that a transferable skill, even though it's not a typical one. Use it as a time to get used to feeling uncomfortable, but also taking the risk and finding the next opportunity.
Dr. Scholl?
I think one thing that you're learning is how to get up to speed on a new topic, a new technology, a new scientific whatever. And that's something that is really important in my career, is trying to understand a new disease, some orphan disease I've never heard of. But I know that I can go into the literature and I can get up to speed on that. And I can be able to ask intelligent questions with the people that I need to interview, or that I can write a report that makes sense. So I think that's something you're learning now. And another thing is being able to explain those technologies or the scientific methodology you've used, or any sort of techno thing, to people who are not from the same background, to people who don't understand it. Just like Sarah was saying earlier, that's something that we have to do all the time, to try to take some big picture thing and boil it down to, oh, I want 4 PowerPoint slides. And it has to be understandable for a wide audience. So hopefully that's something you're also learning now.
I think what I would say is, if you're looking and interested in going into a specific area or field, is try to do at least a little bit of research in that area to know some of the buzzwords. When I interview people that have tried to, let's say, move into pharmaceutical drug development and know some of the buzzwords like IND and NDA, and can talk about that in an interview, that sort of impresses upon me that they've done a little bit of research, they're interested in learning about it. Doing an internship somewhere is always a great idea. Having a little bit of experience to some degree. It's not like you've got to have a tremendous amount of experience to be able to move into a new direction. My entire career, I think I've had an opportunity and just had a little bit of a toehold there, and being able to kind of pull myself up into it, learn as much as I can, and then just sort of kind of go with it. So I don't think you have to feel like you have to know everything about a particular aspect of one thing you want to move into. Know some information about it, get some basic understanding of it, and look for opportunities. That's my thing.
I'm going to take what Mary Beth said a step further. Not just don't be afraid of risk, but don't be afraid to fail. My startup failed. There's no other way to describe it. We ran out of money, we closed shop, the company no longer exists. That experience, I did it while I was in business school, which, adds a little extra level of intensity to my life. I had a newborn at the time. My baby was born 2 months before I started business school. Maybe not ideal, but, at another level, I was pumping in the 3rd floor office while my friends are off drinking coffee, It was not easy, And my LED lighting company failed. Did it fail because the product was bad? No, it was a fantastic product. It was so cool. We had this new LED fixture that we designed and developed. It was 4 scientists. I could slam against a table, something you cannot do with a fluorescent tube, trust me. But it failed. I learned so much during that process, and not only did I learn so much during that process about how to start a startup, what's involved in getting investment, how to pay bills, how to write a business plan. I was in the middle of taking these classes at business school, and I was literally applying them as I was learning them. I wrote a pro forma, which is essentially a financial expectation that you put together for investors, like 2 months after I learned how to write a pro forma. And so I managed to practice all of my skills, and even though the business failed, that experience is what got me my next job. And so I say, fail. Try something you're afraid of trying.
Go out there and fail.
Do something where you can like live, right? Don't work for nothing. That's not what I'm saying. And don't try to fail. That's obviously also not. But do the best you can, and if it fails, don't not do something because you're afraid it might fail, is what I'm saying. I was full in for that LED lighting company. I was so sure it was going to succeed, and when it became clear it was going to fail, it was disappointing. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We were bummed. We had put blood, sweat, and tears into that company. But I came out of it, and I had so many more skills that had been tested. And so the next job I got, which is portfolio decisions, I knew so much more. I was more effective. I knew how to talk to customers better. I knew about how to get investment. I actually started by writing a business plan for the company so they could get investment to grow. That's how I started the company. And now I have a company that I'm trying to get going for these 3 engineers. This is like my 3rd time. It's so much easier the 3rd time, right? The first one failed, but I learned. The second one, I left. And the 3rd one, I know who to go to. I know how to write a business plan. I know the things they need to do to make it successful. And so I would go even a step beyond risk. Do stuff that you think, God, you know, I don't know what's going to happen with this. As long as in the interim, you can support yourself, right? I'm not saying don't support yourself. Do something where you can support yourself, where you think it will succeed. Don't ever go into something when you know it's going to fail. Go into something you think you can do it, but it could fail. 9 out of 10 startups fail, right? So take chances. Try new things. If there's something that you really enjoy doing it, go find it with a company that you like, but don't be afraid to not do it because it might fail.
So I'm going to take one more of the prepared questions that we had for the panelists, and then we'll open things up for maybe a question or two from the audience. So a lot of you have alluded to kind of work-life balance in some of your previous answers, but can you talk to us a little bit about kind of how that works for you in practice? Are you able to leave the office or the job at 5 or 6 p.m. and go home to your family and your hobbies and pets, or how does that work for you? And I'll let folks kind of volunteer in whatever order they want to go.
It works because you make it work. It's that simple. I have 3 small children. I had a newborn. I think I mentioned that. I had a newborn. I used to bring her to some of my lectures, not the classroom ones, but the kind of all of the volunteer stuff. They had a bunch of stuff at the very beginning when we started. It was, you know, how do you write a resume? How do you do an interview? How do you, all this different stuff. I would sit at the back of the auditorium with my 2-month-old infant in her little stroller and listen. And I'd kind of hide in the back and, you know, I'd nurse her in the back, and you make it work. And I think we've all mentioned the supportive spouse. I mean, I realize your spouse wasn't working.
Well, she was supportive. Not financially.
I will tell all of you, male or female, supportive spouse. So important. So important. Working or not working, whatever your spouse's role is in life, supportive of what your choices are. It works because you make it work. You balance it and figure it out. I mean, I know that's not specific, but.
No, I would agree. I've had 2 kids, teenagers now, thankfully, 13 and 15. I had them in the startup, the first startup that I spun out of Duke. I was blessed with, I guess, a boss who had 9 kids. He was a Mormon, and he was a great boss. He was a taskmaster. He made, I mean, when I first joined the company, I can tell you when we were starting it up, and I don't think this is uncommon at all, from the time when we were starting it up and trying to really get things going. When we we had a lot of milestones on our first investment round. I didn't take a day off for almost 12 months. Like, I mean, now I didn't work every, all hours of every single day, but I was at the company every single day for 12 months. And I think I mean, that's just the way it worked, right? I mean, I think now, because we got the company going well enough, even though it failed eventually, when my husband and I, and obviously these conversations are happening in different places, right? At work, you're talking about all the workload you have and everything else, and at home, you're deciding, is this the right time to have kids, right? I mean, but, we had gotten married late, I wasn't getting any younger, and it was a conscious choice on our part, but I think we both realized, like, okay, well, if we do it now, then we think my company was very supportive of that. They had even though they were small, they had a lot of good kind of infrastructure around the employees. Even though we were small, I think they recognized that it was important to recruit good employees. You had to have some things around them to support them. And so we went ahead and did it at the point in time, it ended up being a good point in time, because I will say, even though I worked a lot at that company, it was very flexible. And I could, if I needed to go pick my kid up at daycare because he got sick, then I would leave and I'd go do that, and my husband would stay at work, and then when he was done at work, he'd come home, and then I go back to work. So, I mean, I think it does go back to that, you make it work. If it's important to you, you will make it work. I will clearly tell you now that my job right now is much more standard hours, since I don't work in a lab. I don't oversee a lot of people. I don't have a lot of management responsibility right now. I have just the grants that I oversee and the programs that I run. And I can drive my own hours a lot. The Biotech Center is a standardly open facility, so our hours are 8 to 5. It's a publicly funded organization, so that is very standard. I might choose to work those hours, but I also might spend some of those off-site. I travel a little bit around the state for my job. But I think it is. I think I will also tell you, though, that if I want to go see my son run in his track meet, I'm going to take an hour to go see him run in his track meet, and then I'll put in the hours later, because I have found personally that it's a lot more about getting the work done and being effective in your job than specifically what time does your boss see you show up in your office versus the time to leave. If you present him with a good deliverable each day or that type of thing, then you will be rewarded with respect and responsibility.
And when you're your own boss, it's really an interesting thing, because the work has to get done. And so it's the same thing. You set your priorities and you make it work. And when we have weeks when we're just crazy busy, then I'm going to be there, I'm going to be doing the work. But then there are other weeks that I can take that Tuesday off and go do something that needs to be done. So again, the work has to be done,
right,
and that's what's important, not the hours.
I think the flexibility was one thing that attracted me to consulting, but again, my different roles when early on versus now. Early on, there was always sort of this pull to trying to maximize billable time, and so it's a constant sort of battle, work-life balance. You've got to make time for yourself and your family. There's always going to be something that's pulling you back into it, and now it's not necessarily the billable time, but it's just making sure everything's kind of functioning. So it's a challenge. You're it. I mean, as a consultant, you're the one who's driving the revenue, or driving the business, wearing multiple hats, and so it's a constant challenge to be able to have that balance.
Thank you. So we've got about 7 minutes remaining. Do we have a question from the audience? In the back.
How often do you travel, or if you travel at all?
The question was for the camera, how often do you travel, or do you travel at all?
I've worked largely for organizations that the stakeholder population is mostly North Carolina. So I've traveled all the way from Elizabeth City to Cullowhee, which is just about on the Tennessee border. And I do a fair amount of that now, but I only do occasional trips to DC or other areas. So I can't say that I have a big travel component to my job, but there is an aspect of travel to it, but it's just never been required of me.
I'm pretty variable. We work virtually with our clients. We don't see half our clients, so my travel's very unpredictable.
I've had some really interesting travel. Like I've had a client who wanted me to go to a meeting in Singapore. That's great. But most people are happy with just phone calls or Skype. We don't have to actually go meet with most of our clients.
I'd say it depends. I've done a number of different roles over the years. I had roles where I was traveling overseas probably 30–40% of the time. LED lighting company, it was all local, trying to get local customers. With portfolio decisions, I primarily traveled to Houston every couple of months for a week or so to primarily actually to hang out with my colleagues, not to go meet customers. When you're a virtual company, it's actually good to meet your colleagues once in a while. But I would say it depends. All businesses are different. If you're in certain consulting companies, they travel 90% of the time. So the big ones, if you decide to go into one of the big consulting firms, which by the way, love scientists because they always need scientists. There are never enough scientists in large consulting firms. It's one of those things. And so those, you'll go Monday to Thursday. And by this I mean like Boston Consulting Group, Deloitte, those big ones. But then you could be companies where it's not a consulting firm and you could travel 50% or you could travel none. It really depends what kind of company you go into, especially because the opportunities for all of you are so varied.
I saw a question in the back and then we'll come here if we have time.
So I'm getting my PhD in nursing, and a lot of people told me they're not sure what to do with nurses who have PhDs. So do you have any advice for someone like me, that's going to industry?
The question for the camera was, I have a PhD or getting a PhD in nursing. Do you have any advice for people like me who might want to pursue opportunities like you have?
I see a lot of nurses in clinical research. I mean, there's a number of opportunities, entry-level positions in clinical research. One of them I can think of is called a clinical research associate, where you go out and monitor clinical trials. And that, I've seen a lot of people use that as a stepping stone into other aspects of pharmaceutical drug development. That's the first thing that came to my mind for that aspect.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you're in a perfect location because North Carolina is one of the clinical research hubs of the world. If you've got quintiles and PPD, not to mention all of the smaller firms that have popped up as people that got fed up of being at quintiles and PPD, and then branch out to form their own firm. All of those have clinical aspects to their business models, and nurses are a huge portion of that, in my opinion.
So my question is, so everyone talking about how to take risks, not stick to the certainty, be flexible, extend your comfort zone. I just want to kind of talk about what you think from your experience, most kind of life-changing experience that you realize you can extend your own comfort zone because you can take a risk. It's not a big deal. I think Sarah probably experienced. We can talk a little bit about failure experience. Oh, I can be comfortable. Such a big failure, not a big deal. I learned so much. But I think if you can give more, other panel can talk more what you most memorable experience make you change. Because PhD training is more rigid, predictability, like very controlled. This would be happen particular way. And how we can extend our comfort zone.
Just do it.
So the question for the camera was, in a nutshell, what life experience led you to kind of take risks and expand your comfort zone?
So, I mean, I think for me, I think there were the 2 points really. I think that were most important to me for where I got to. The first was recognizing that I didn't want to just go into another postdoc when my other postdoc was ending. I had no reason to believe that these two other faculty members that were thinking of starting a company would consider me a reasonable employee. I had no industry experience. I wasn't in either one of their labs. They were taking one or two people from their labs to transfer the technology out into the company. I think it was very, I will tell you that it probably took me like a week to build up enough courage to go to them and say, so I hear you're starting a company. And not because that was a secret or anything, but it was just the department at the time, and we were just actually sharing before y'all came in how we, even though we're pretty far removed from it, we kind of remember that stage when we were evaluating life after postdoc and that kind of thing. And we actually think it's great progress that they even hold these events, right? Because like when I sat in that chair, when I was in your shoes, you know, I just had to meander around my department and decide like, who do I need to talk to next about, you know, an opportunity or something like that. I didn't have a place to go to. I had to figure out that on my own. So I think this is great that you invite us to come and talk, and hopefully we show you that there is life outside of academic science, which clearly there is. That's not, I'm not saying that that's, you know, not a foregone conclusion. But I think, for me, I think that was very uncomfortable. I was a shy person. I was an introverted scientist. I think I have come out of my shell because I got pushed to come out of my shell when I was in that company. They made me present to investors because I was the scientist. And they said, well, surely you know the science best, so get up there. And it was very uncomfortable for me. But I think that's where I went, okay? Because if that's what I wanted, then that's what I had to do, right? I mean, you have to recognize that in order to get something that you want, even if it's pretty far out there, you're gonna have to take the steps. Nobody else is gonna take them for you. You know, it's great that Melanie's neighbor gave her a job, but that doesn't always happen, okay? And so I think, you know, one of the things I will tell you, and I try to actually represent this to any, because I've done a couple of these in the past. We all talk about networking, and I remember being in that chair thinking, oh my God, if one more person says networking to me, I'm going to scream. and it is really important. And when I say that, it's because you never know who you're going to meet. So the guy that was the CEO of that first startup that I joined, 2 years before that, had run a class here, a night class at Duke here. It was like an adult education thing about how to buy your first house. And my husband and I attended that class. And we were in the process of buying our first house. So we went up and we chatted with him, and you know, and we even followed up with him when we signed a contract. And so like, he didn't know me well, but he knew me. And then 2-3 years later, just by chance, where they're like, the two scientific founders were like, oh, we got a CEO. Max Wallace is gonna leave. He's really great. And I'm like, Max Wallace? I think he taught me how to buy a house. And so, and I knew he wasn't a real estate guy. He was a lawyer. And so, you know, but he had a history in biotech. And so when I sat down with him, and this was my, you know, I think I had already kind of secured a job in that company from talking to the scientific founder, but I had to get the CEO on board. And that first time I sat down with him, he's like, don't I know you? And I said, yeah, I took a class from you 2 years ago. And then that just like opened the floodgates that we could just talk, right? It wasn't this high pressure interview situation, but like, you know, that was the first example of like, just never underestimate who you're going to meet. You know, at the coffee shop, you know, especially on this campus. This campus is teeming with entrepreneurs. And so I think, you know, just always appreciate that when you may meet somebody, you know, and you talk to them, represent your best self. You know, and talk lucidly about what you do now, as well as what you might want to do later. And just always take advantage of those serendipitous occasions when they do present themselves, because those are some of your best opportunities.
Maybe not term it networking, but just meeting. Because
yeah.
when I met Bill, who helped me start the company, I had brought him back into the pharma company that I was working at for a consulting gig, and he said, "You know anybody who could do this?" I said, "Well, yeah, I could probably do that." That started the conversation, and I literally, it wasn't networking. I just was working with them early in my career, and it just, you know, opportunities present themselves when you meet people, and it's amazing.
Please join me in thanking our panel. And if our panelists have a moment to stick around, they might be available to talk with you one-on-one. Thank you so much for joining us.
How's it going? Good luck with communication.